thank you again for having me here, and especially that this is a community and a colloquium for not specific for certain area, like certain area studies, like where I am right now in Chinese studies. So I really appreciate this opportunity for me to introduce the projects. But also that I'm thinking about why this would be interesting for you. So what I'm going to do is that I will present two of the projects that I'm working on, but I will argue that, I hope that after the talk that I can give you something that would be also useful for working with any kind of digital collections of text and in history. So I'm going to talk about the methodology that I call it treating a genre as a knowledge system or a knowledge base. And I will use two examples. One is Chinese local gazetteers, and the other one is daily use encyclopedias, and with quantitative approaches. So let me begin. So the main takeaway, or the main thing that I hope to demonstrate today, is that how revisiting a well-studied historical genre with quantitative approaches can help historians to get different kind of insights from close reading. So I'm sure you are all very familiar with the term distant reading, in comparing to close reading that historians in the past centuries have been doing, reading very closely at the text. And I want to give you another metaphor, that is to see a forest versus to studying individual trees. That, of course, studying individual trees can give us a lot of detail, but what we're talking about is there is a forest, and whether we can see the general patterns of this forest, and what would be the overall system behind the forest. Like forest that I'm replacing it right now with genre, a historical genre. And there can be different systems or different overall patterns about that forest, but how are we going to discover that? So this is what I will be talking about. But when we do this kind of quantitative analysis, quantitative approaches, what we're usually doing is counting. Like we're counting which phenomenon appear in more of the forest, like more of the trees in the forest, and which less. When we are doing counting, we need to think about something, whether this sample that we're using, whether this is comprehensive enough for us to really project to the whole forest. Because historical sources, most of them, even in our case, the Chinese local gazetteers, many of them are lost by now. So we are using the existing ones, and we're using the digitized ones. And how can we make sure that the phenomenon we are seeing in this sample collection really can represent the whole forest that is like in the past? Okay, so we will start with local gazetteers. So local gazetteers, let me start with this question. So there are many early modern empires, and they owned a large land. They have huge territory. Sometimes they have colonies. And how did these empires know all about their territories, every local regions? So a few years ago in 2019, we had a workshop called Knowing an Empire, and that brought two empire studies within. So one is about Spanish Empire, and the other is Chinese. So we discovered that they were those empires, they were generating systematic, comprehensive knowledge of the local world by a systematic manner. So in the case of Spanish Empire, after it acquired New Spain, that is today Mexico, they sent out questionnaires to collect local data with predefined categories. I think if I remember correctly, there were like 50 questions, and they asked about what was produced locally, and what were the people look like, what were their local customs, etc., etc. So, and eventually those questionnaires, they form a genre that is called Relaciones Geográficas. I'm sure that I pronounced it wrong, but it's geographic relations. And in the Chinese case, that the Chinese Empire, they ask local officials to constantly compile something called Local Gazetteers. So these are the place where they collect local data. They actually try to collect the most up-to-date data and with predefined categories. So, so these are the main genre for collecting and recording local data in historical China since at least the 12th century. It could be earlier. And I'm borrowing a definition from my colleague, Joe Dennis. The local gazetteers are cumulative records. That means that they include not only contemporary data, but also historical data that they can trace about a territorial unit, and most of them were compiled by a local government, like mainly initiated by a local official, and he would call a team of local literati who were trained in classics and who can write and compile works, and then they were published in book formats. So, so the kind of local unit, the territory units, most of them are administration units like counties, prefectures, provinces, and in some rare cases, the entire state. Like the Ming Dynasty, they had a Ming gazetteer for the whole territory. But not only that, they also have gazetteers that were compiled for certain geographic regions. For example, the banks of a river, for the Yellow River, for example, or for military garrisons, in particular at the borderlands. Because in those cases, they did need to understand the local situation, and they needed to collect the local data in order to govern that place or to get resources from that place. And the data, they came in categories. So I will look into that further. But right now, I want to give you some visual impression about how what the local gazetteer look like. So this one is from 1803. It's a county gazetteer. It is owned by Harvard Yenching Library, and they very nicely scan all of them and then putting them online. And the reading orientation is from the right. So this is the first page. This is a cover saying this is done to County Gazetteer. And then they have several prefaces included. And then they will move on to table of contents for a couple of pages. And hold on, wrong direction. Okay, and then they give several maps of the region. So this is a broader region, and this is looking into the city of the county seat in more detail. They even they draw the river, the wall, city wall, and then the streets and some important landmarks within the city. And they even have star maps. And this is something that is very, very interesting that I will also talk about later. So usually in the Chinese traditional cosmology, that they had to relate a local region with certain areas in the sky, and they usually use the constellations. So they would say that our county belong to this and that constellation, and then they draw a star map and include them in the local gazetteers as a way for the whole empire to understand the position of this place. So that is something I personally find very interesting. Okay, so after a couple of maps and illustrations, they would move on to text. And the text is actually the majority of this genre. So they have descriptive text, but because these are collecting data, so they usually list the data or they give the data in list form, like what you can see here. They are very short, but these are the lists of certain things, of mountains or of books. And here we can see some more in detail the data categories that they used. So they very often have a section called geography, where they give maps and they give you the history of how this place was established, and the local customs, what are the mountains and rivers and monuments that you can find in this local region, and the infrastructure, what are the temples, bureaus, schools, and food and commodities, what are the household taxes, what are the local products that you can get from this place. And they also list the local officials, list different kinds of people, and then they also give the writings of local literati. So it's very elaborate. And one thing very interesting is also that I think each local gazetteer compiler team, they had their own agenda, but there were some common categories that were either imposed by the court, like there were, like in the 14th century, the court issued like 22 categories that every local gazetteer should include. But due to like the interest of the local society, they might have other categories that they put into that maybe like demonstrate that this place is very prominent and it can contribute a lot and it's important to the empire. So for example, they have wood logging, it's very close to the forest, etc., etc. And the other thing that is very unique for local gazetteers, and that is also how, like, why we are able to use local gazetteers to do this research, is the quantity of the historical gazetteers. So historically, compiling local gazetteers were a common practice for at least 800 years long, and for all the administration units. And not even that, they were regularly updated every a couple of years. We're talking about maybe 80 years, maybe a century, or maybe 150 years. But that means there are multiple local gazetteers existed for the same region. So you can think about it as a time series, that you are not only getting a snapshot of a certain time, you are getting several snapshots at different times in history about this place. And they document almost things in the same categories, almost. So that gives us basically it is already a database, but not a computable one yet. But it is already a huge database. If you want to find certain information, for example, a certain temple or a certain grain, like a fruit, red chili peppers, for example, then you can go to these gazetteers and then you flip them through, you can find records like consistently that they are maybe like recorded in the local product section. But the other thing is that there are more than 8,000 titles, physical, distinct copies. We're not talking about the same title stored in different libraries, but 8,000 distinct physical copies of different gazetteers still exist in libraries, museums, archival institutes around the world. And a large amount of them are already digitized. So they are digitized local gazetteer databases offered by commercial vendors, by commercial companies. I list 3 major ones, and we are working mainly with the first one. And we are not talking a couple of hundred here and a couple of hundreds there. We're talking about 4,000 in one collection, and another 4,000 in another collection, and another 7,000 in another collection. Of course, you see this number, you would realize, okay, they are overlapping. But if we take only one, and which we are taking the first one, that these are the distinct copies of digitized version of gazetteers. They are scanned. They have book metadata, the publication date, the editors, and they are digitized in searchable digital full text. And that makes a huge game change. We didn't do the digitization ourselves. We contact the company, and Berlin State Library help us to get a special license to to allow our tool to interact with the raw materials directly. And that's how we can build tool surrounding these 4,000 titles of local gazetteers. So this is the database that we're using, the 中国方志库, or by a company in Beijing called Erudition. And it has 4,000 gazetteers. We can see the temporal distribution. So you can see that before the 1600 is very few, and it is actually not correspond to history, because we know that from some historical record, we know that in the Song dynasty, which probably end from 10th to 12th century, there were at least 1,000 gazetteers compiled. But we cannot see it here because most of them were gone. But after the 16th century onward, we have quite good representations of historical gazetteers compiled. And we can also see a geographic distribution of those 4,000 gazetteers. And here I'm using a background map that is the 1820 provincial boundaries provided by CHGIS. That's a infrastructural project done by Harvard University and several other universities, and they create the polygons for historical studies. And I used the background map. They are colors, the orange and yellow colors. These represent the number of gazetteers in each provinces. But the actual data is the blue points. So you can see that there are bigger circles, smaller circles, but basically they represent the geographic locations of the 4,000 gazetteers. And the larger ones, it simply means that the nearby points, smaller points, they were aggregated to form a bigger cluster. And if you zoom in, then they will break down and you can see the actual points. Okay, so back to the comprehensiveness of this digital collection. So we already know that, wow, this is really a big collection. And now it is now possible to do some computational quantitative analysis. Rather than reading each of the gazetteers alone, we can read them all together. 4,000, wow, that's amazing. But we also need to, like, back to the question that I earlier mentioned, that we need to think about how representative this collection is, like in regard with all the historical gazetteers that were ever compiled. And most of them are, like many of them are lost by now. So from the bibliography record done by historians that we estimated, they were probably between 12,000 to 20,000 titles of local gazetteers ever compiled in Chinese history. And if we are taking the collection of 4,000 gazetteers from Erudition 中国方志库, then it covered roughly 1/5 to 1/3 of historical gazetteers. And that is a very, very high proportion. That is, I think, like the best you can ask for if you are doing any kind of statistic representation of history. So we argue that these 4,000 is actually, despite that it is not the complete extent existing set of local gazetteers, we can still get a very good representation. So I give you an example. So if we run a full text search about a certain term, a terminology of keyword, it would give us a relatively accurate approximation of that term's overall distribution in all the historical gazetteers. Let's see a real example. So if the term that I'm talking about is a locust temple, so here there was a Chinese geographer. His name was Chen Zhengxiang, and he was commissioned by International Geographic Society to produce a map for locust disasters for China. But at the time, there was no such data set. So he had the idea to flip over 3,000 physical local gazetteers to obtain such a data set. And then these are the two maps that he created. So we can see that there are some concentration of locust temples, one on locust temples in the around the Yellow River, and the other around the Yangtze River. And he also gets some data set from certain Ming Dynasty prefectural gazetteers about where they really record the locust disasters. But those records are not overall documented. That's why he also used the locust temples. And hold on. So what we want to do is that we try to replicate his method. That this is a really, like he was already using the existing local gazetteers as a data source to generate historical data sets. And then he can map them to understand the pattern. So this is exactly how we get this project started. So we recreated his map with LoGaRT, that is the tool we developed, and we produced this map. So first of all, this tool runs in minutes. So what we did beforehand as a preprocessing method is that we associate each local gazetteer with a geo coordinate, so that whenever there is a term inputted into the full text search engine, we can immediately draw a distribution map for you. And this runs in minutes. Like after all the preprocessing is done, this you can throw in a different term, you can care about a different tempo, you can care about a totally different thing, like the product of red chili peppers in China. And you can also zoom in, you can zoom out, you can read, you can click on some points, and then it will pull to you the actual records, how this tempo was recorded in a local gazetteer, what is the text about it. You can read them. And you can also analyze, because now this is a data set, it's computable. So you can use another way to analyze the data set. You can use another way to visualize the data set. So for example, what I did here with different colors is that I distinguished the different tempo names with different colors. And I realized the tempo for the A farming gods, that's the yellow one, they took place, they are named usually in the north, in the Yellow River region. And the other tempo is the tempo for the general Liu, the fears, that appear mostly in the south, in the Yangtze River region, for example. And now we have the ability, because it is a data set, it is computable. So we now have the ability to analyze the data set in different ways that we want. And user can ask a different question by searching for a different term. Okay, and when we put the two maps side by side, we can also see that Chen Zhenxiang, he was using 3,000 gazetteers, and on the right we are using 4,000 gazetteers. He didn't give us which 3,000 titles he was using, but we now have the exact titles for the 4,000. But anyway, the distribution seems very similar. You can see the concentration here that correspond to here, and then the Yangtze River region that is corresponding to here, and there are some scatter point in the southwest here as well. Maybe there are some more, some less, but in general, the distribution seems to be very similar. So that hook up with what we assumed earlier, that we think this data set is, 4,000 local gazetteers, is statistically representative. So that confirms it. So the tool that we built surrounding these 4,000 gazetteers is called LoGaRT, or Local Gazetteer Research Tools. And the idea is that now we have a method that we can use local gazetteers to collect historical data. How about that we make it into a tool so that other people can also use it and they can ask different questions? Yeah, and the kind of question that we want to ask, or the kind of question that can be better supported by this kind of computational quantitative analysis, is those that can only be answered by the genre as a whole. So by many gazetteers, as many as possible, jointly. So that's why I developed this slogan as treating the genre as a knowledge base or as a database, that however you call it, but I think you understand what I'm trying to say. Yeah. So in our specific case, that we allow historians to use LoGaRT to probe the genre, and as a user, you can collect historical data through these digitized gazetteers and across time and space. So you collect historical data sets by searching or tagging. Tagging I will mention later, and then you get a data set. And what we did is that after that, we also provide you with a set of visual statistical analysis tools. So mapping is one that I see it as a statistical tool, a visual one. And you can also create timeline that we saw earlier. You can also create pie chart or other kinds of visual statistical analysis. And then that would then offer you a bird's eye view or a way to see the patterns from the whole forest. But two other things that I also want to emphasize is that you can very easily switch between a close reading view and the bird's eye view, the distant view. So after you see the map, you can click and you can really read the records that is out of the primary source. And that would help you to understand your data actually in more depth. And in some cases that you might, like when you are reading, you might also realize that, oh, my query is actually not perfect. There is a missing term that I didn't catch in the previous round. Then I can redesign my query, and then I go back here and then do another search with the new terms that I found, and then I do this all over again. Okay, so I think I already talked about this, that I distinguish two different tempo names, but the question behind is actually, where did locust disasters take place in historical China? And why we can use the locust tempos to approximate it is that only when such disasters happen over and over again, that the locals would dedicate money to build a temple to try to calm down the disaster. So that's why we use locust temples. But this also demonstrates that whenever we are approaching a digital collection, that we need to have certain translation from our original question, historical question, into something that we can get from the digital collection. And when we see the same data set from a temporal distribution view, something interesting also appear. That the yellow one is the first tempo name, and the blue one is the tempo for generative fears. And we found out the second one only appear after a certain time. And later on, when I talked to another scholar who was working on religious studies, he told me that this second tempo name was actually a something implemented by the emperor. So they wanted to dedicate. So it is a kind of official tempo. These are not local tempos like the first one. These are the blue ones. They are official tempos, a top-down decision from the emperor, from the court, to establish these kind of tempos. So this is also something that we can, like when we are doing distribution analysis or quantitative analysis, like sometimes we see something that we don't really know, but someone who has the insight, who is the trend historian, who will be able to see. Okay, so I showed this page already, but here I want to emphasize that the local gazetteers, they collect local data with certain categories. So these are the categories, and they appear as section headings or chapter headings. And each local gazetteer is actually a data collection project. And it's already a database, and they organize the data within certain and consistent categories. So the other thing that I want to go back to the idea of treating a genre as a knowledge system is that if we think about what one should know about a locality, especially in the Chinese case, that these categories that each of the compilers they decide are actually very autonomic, that they had the right to decide what gets to be included in their own gazetteer and what they want to kick out. So if we see the whole genre, like 800 years of documenting local data as a joint genre, then analyzing the section headings as knowledge categories can help us to understand how this system evolved throughout time and throughout space. Yeah, so what kind of information did the compilers think ought to be recorded in their own local gazetteers? And how did these categories change over 800 years across different regions of historical China? So here in this table, I did a counting, like of course not me, but the computers did a counting of different section headings and their proportion of appearance in the corpus in the 4,000. And here I give you a percentage. So the preface appear in 85%, and the table of contents in maybe 67%. The people, the literature, the customs, schools, monuments, city walls, local products, And so here is a descending order. And then what I did is that I divide them into different historical periods of dynasties. So in the Song and Yuan, these are very early, so only very few still exist today. But since from the 16th century, from the Ming Dynasty, there are thousands of gazetteers still extant. So we can see that there are also up and downs, like for example, literature. In the Ming Dynasty, there were about 30% that has this section heading. But moving on to the Qing Dynasty, that is from the 17th to the early 20th century, 300 years, there are a huge jump of including this section heading in their gazetteers. So we can see these up and downs, and then see that these are ups, and then some declined in the Republican period, that's the 20th century. And we can start to see how these knowledge systems evolve through time. Okay, and I would also give another example that is more specific. So there was a section heading that is called 分野, and this is regarding the star maps that I talked about earlier. So not only they document a map of their stars that their region should be assorted with, they also have a text section that is called field allocation or 分野. And then that is using the textual form to record that our region should be assorted with this and that constellation in the sky. But since the 16th century, the European missionaries, they brought in the Western sciences, and they are so accurate that they can like identify a place by their longitude and latitude. So why does this 分野, then that basically replaced the 分野system, the field allocation system, field allocation using the stars. So there was an act that was like initiated by the emperor and then promoted by high officials, followed by several, like many, like the usual scholarship saying that there were many gazetteers, compilers, that they follow this idea. So they remove the section heading of field location and then replace it with something called 纬度, and that is the Chinese term for longitude and latitude. So this is what the scholarship used to believe, that they see many vivid examples that these gazetteers, they say that they follow this, and they also argue they give a whole argument of why field allocation should be replaced by longitude and latitude. So this is what the scholarship used to believe. But what we did in LoGaRT is that we run a section heading search. So in our database, we are able to only search for section headings. And then we draw a temporal chart. And then you can see the 纬度, the replacement. That is the yellow part. In total, there were only 115 such sections existed, in comparison to all the green part that is that demonstrate the resistance actually from the local officials, the local literati, rejecting the emperor's idea of replacing this field allocation system. And that might be due to that this is very central to the Chinese cosmology. And the emperor himself, he will die someday, but local gazetteers, they will survive throughout time. Like we can still see them today. And so it is very culturally very important for the local literatis to keep these section headings. And they don't say that we reject it, they simply keep it. And they didn't install the new 纬度 section. And this is an implicit rejection already. So from this kind of quantitative analysis, although this is very simple, this is only based on section headings, and we can search for section headings and then draw maps, draw temporal charts, but this already is very useful. Okay, so in LoGaRT, we also have some other ideas or some other technology that we developed to use the whole of local gazetteers as a data source to collect historical data. So one other example is that, remember that I mentioned that in local gazetteers, they usually use the list form to list things. Like in this case, it is listing the books that are stored in local libraries. So one title, second title, third title, etc. And in some other cases, they list all the mountains, the rivers, all the bridges, all the official names, historical official names that ever served in this local region. So a lot of lists. And so what we did is that we want to have a way to convert these textual lists into computer recognizable data sets. So we developed a text tagging system. And so for example, these are the text, the digital text after it is tagged. So the original text digital text look like this. And then we have a semi-automatic way of also identifying patterns, like using regular expression, but also manual tagging. And eventually, our visiting scholar, Joseph Demnes, he did this. He went through 600 such lists that he could find in the collection that we have. And then he tagged different information, like book titles in pink, numbers of volumes in purple, and then personal names and the date when the school received this title, and then the locations, like in which school it was that this title were stored in. And then after he did the tagging, he clicked one button to transform it into a data table. And then he went through 600 lists So he created 600 such tables, and then we combine them. And then what he were able to do is that we built him also a user interface, and now it is called the Books in China database. So we help him to design this user interface, but basically to allow other people to use these 30,000 records that he accumulated, he curated from LoGaRT, from the 4,000. And people would not need to go through the full text ever again, because these are the condensed form of the data that he curated for the field. And in Local Gazetteers, we also have some visual materials. So I will not go into the details, but we had two groups of scholars. They published in two special issues in historical journals. One is in History of Science, and the other is in Chinese Studies. So basically, what we did is that we identify around 70,000 pages with illustrations from the 4,000 titles. And then what we ask is that by looking at these illustrations all together, independent from their context. So we pull them out from their own context, but then we put them together. And we want to see how does it impact our understanding of the roles of illustrations in this mainly textual genre. So these are the published works. And on the right-hand side, I'm showing you that these are the about 1,400 star maps that I talked about earlier. And they are plotted on this pen, on this space, based on image similarity. So these are already very mature computational algorithms that you can do a dimension reduction, and you can represent an image in a space. And if we look closer, we seem to see some clusters. So for example, the right-hand side is from this region. And then the other one is from the middle, I don't know where. But you can see that on this cluster, similarly cluster, it seems to show half or the whole circles. And these are the star maps that give the whole system, like tells you like surrounding 360 degrees of the night sky, where are the constellations. And then down on the left-hand side, this small cluster that all have the Milky Way running through it. So quantitative approaches for historical genre. So this is a small wrap-up for the Local Gazetteers part. So we have digitized collections with certain quantity, and in our case, large quantity. And we need to think about the comprehensiveness of this digital collection for presenting the underlying genre. So for presenting the underlying whole forest. And we propose the idea of treating a genre as a knowledge system or a knowledge base. And there are questions that require the whole genre to answer. So we don't, of course, with quantitative analysis, we don't want to deal with those questions that only close reading can answer. But on the other hand, we want to deal with another set of questions that require the whole genre to answer. And there can be different types of questions to be asked toward different genres. Like certain genres, due to their specialty and characteristic of the genre, the nature of the genre, only certain types of questions can be answered. And that also resulted in different kinds of quantitative approaches that we should be thinking about, we should be designing for a specific genre. And in the case of Local Gazetteers, we have full text search. We associate each local gazetteer with a geocoordinate, and that is not possible for every digital collection, because in some collections, they don't have this kind of geographical information. But in our case, we have that, so we take advantage of that so that we can do mapping after each query. And we can show you geographic and temporal distributions, also because we have the dating information. And we have the full text, so we can do text tagging. We have some images, so we can do some image similarity. So these are the possibilities that not only be brought about by the possibilities of technology, but actually they are concerning the nature of your collection, that certain methods would be useful, but certain are not, or not possible. So now, let me see, how much time do I still have? Maybe another 10 minutes. I think I can do in 10 minutes. So now I can move on to another genre that I'm not right now working on, and that is called the daily use or household encyclopedias. And this is this is the main primary source that we're looking at in the common knowledge and its sources in the Sinosphere working group in our institute. And it is ongoing, so I only have very preliminary results, but I would like to share you the kind of very different quantitative approaches that we are currently designing for this genre. So a little bit background about what this genre is. So they are called daily use category books. And this is the direct translation, that they categorize knowledge within different categories, a set of categories. And this, excuse me. So this whole project or working group is concerning about something in relation to literati knowledge in historical China. That was the mainstream of knowledge. Like all the publications are written by literati, they were read by literati, and most of them are to prepare them to become part of the government. So to assist the emperor to govern the whole empire. But since the late 16th century, there was a new type of commercial publications that they package some kind of publication. They try to sell comprehensive daily use practical knowledge to people that are literate, but they are not literati. So they are not PhDs. Basically, so they didn't go to college, but they can read certain words, functional words. Like if they are clerks in a shop, then they know certain functional words that allow them to read. So some commercial publishers, they start to publish this so-called daily use category books or daily use encyclopedias to this group of people. And they very often have exaggerated titles, like very long, newly carved. This is the latest, most up-to-date, fictitiously selected from Mr. I's library. And whoever knows Mr. I is, but that is someone that people can get an impression, and then, oh, there is a fantastic library. And these information, this knowledge within this book are selected from there. And these knowledge are convenient for browsing, and they are complete for a myriad of treasures. So you must buy it. So this is the idea, that they are using this kind of terminology, and also some other terminology, like they are essentially useful for household. So every house should buy one, and they are conveniently browsing for all the people, and for a myriad of occasions that you can use it in many occasions in your daily life. And they are complete, and they have treasures, and once you have it, you would never ever have to ask another person about this knowledge. So this is the mindset they were having. And the interesting thing about them is that they want to present an encyclopedic comprehensive knowledge set for commoners. So for people who don't want to enter the national exam and then become an official one day to help govern the whole country, But they also categorize these kind of comprehensive knowledge in categories. And these are the categories they often use. So heaven, earth, and human. These are actually the traditional categories that from literati writing, that everything is regarding this cosmology of heaven and earth and human. These are the three aspects of the same thing. So you can observe things on earth by looking at the stars. And that is also why the local gazetteers, they have this field allocation. So if something happened in our constellation, then something will also happen on land, in our land. Yeah. But beyond that, these are the traditional cosmology categories. But beyond that, they also have seasonal ordinances to tell you when for a farmer to spread seeds and to harvest and to do this and that for agriculture. And they have, so for example, laws, and they tell you about the official boundaries. They tell you how to write a letter to your relatives, or they give you templates, like templates for all the occasions for writing letter to your father-in-law, or to write to your cousin, or if you one day have a need to talk to a literati official, how do you write such a letter? So very practical things, playing scissors, playing chess, writing how to write calligraphy and how to do martial arts, and how do you, what is the ritual look like that when there is a marriage or funeral that you should prepare. So these are from very literati classical knowledge to daily use practical knowledge that they have all the categories in comprising that. So someone told me that in Europe and in the US, there is a genre called almanacs that is very similar. So they also include how do you understand the climate and how do you do this at certain time of the year, etc. And this genre also include a lot of illustrations in order to attract readers or buyers. So these are some sample table of contents. They are usually 20 to 40 chapters. They are divided into upper register and lower register. And this is a sample page from the chapter of the heaven. So this is usually the opening chapter. But the heaven is very important for the court or for the high literati, for the elites, because this is where the secrets of the future can be within encoded. But what kind of usefulness do general people need to know about the heaven? So this is something interesting. So we found out that you can see these small diagrams. Basically, they give 100 different diagrams about the heavenly patterns. So the pattern of what the heaven look like during the day or during the night. And then they give you the definition, what would happen if you see 5 stars within the sun. That maybe that there will be war, the emperor will die, etc., etc. And interestingly is that such heavenly knowledge was restricted in the imperial court for most of the imperial historical China time. And there are repetition contents in different editions. So if you open the first chapter of 3 different daily use encyclopedias published in different time, then you can see that, oh, they look very, very similar. They have the same illustration. They maybe have the same text. So that brings us to some interesting question. So our question for the working group is, we want to trace the source material to understand where did the commercial publishers get their content from. And we have a very strong assumption that because the commercial publishers sold this book in relatively cheap price, they probably wouldn't create the content by themselves. So in other words, they must have taken them from somewhere else and then maybe they do a very quick editing, removing something, adding something to form this genre. So the question behind this is like whether how much of them are from the common or the traditional literary knowledge. There has been a lot of material about heaven, for example. Where did they really take these contents from, and what did they add? What did they reduce? So that we can more understand their strategy, and also to understand the nature of these kind of common readers. So in terms of technology, that right now we want to employ two sets of technology in detecting the copying of historical sources. One is visual, the other is textual. So the visual copying, we already see that different versions, they often have very, very similar illustrations, maybe re-illustrated and recarved in wood blocks and then printed. So the technology we've so far identified are the many image similarity algorithms, clustering algorithms, and dimension reduction algorithms that would allow images to be calculated and then plotted on a 2D or 3D plan space and where similar images can be clustered together or displayed together. So that's the idea. We already see some examples. And for textual copying, we are using quotation analysis or I think it is also be called text reuse. So we already identify a software open source package that is developed by University of Chicago. It's called TextPair. So they are talking about intertextual relationship and how to detect similar text, but not exactly identical text, big chunk of text. And if we can do that, then we probably can compare a lot of text, and then we can see where they have similar text. So I give you some screenshots because right now we only have preliminary results. So this is one machine learning model that we refined, not trained, but we refined. We took something existing and then we refined with 4 books of household encyclopedia, and then we asked it to identify all the illustrations. And this is one of the results that it depicts, that it really pick up the illustrations that we want. And based on that, we can then gather all the illustrations together, and then we can start to calculate their similarity. So here we are still doing some experiments in using certain algorithms, and you can see that on the left-hand side, it seems to work well. So the top one is the target. And then with that, we find we pull out other similar images currently in the database that are similar to this one. So you can see that the first two are indeed very similar. They are the same diagram, basically. And here is also very interesting because it is half of the original diagram, but it still finds it. But after that, how come it can appear a person's portrait? We don't understand. So we still need to retune. And on the right-hand side, this diagram is sort of more simple. So the similar images it finds, the first 3 are indeed the same diagram, but after that, it's also like not really trustworthy. So we are still trying to find a better way to improve this. And this is an example from TextPair. So we use some text and putting them in, and the interface can tell us show us the similar passages, and they are not identical. So left and right, they are not identical, but it finds it. But we are still trying to find a more efficient way to digest, because then it finds a lot. And we need to find a way to digest and make the results useful. Yeah, okay, so this is the last page. So wrapping up, some message that I really like you to take away is that so we promote this idea of treating a genre as a knowledge system or a knowledge base. And we believe that this can be applied to many, many other digitized historical collections. And I think many digital humanities projects already have this idea in mind, but maybe they didn't like really say it. But what we did is that we tailor-made a tool set that is tailor-made for a specific genre. And according to the nature characteristic of that genre, we were able to design very specific tools that really take full advantage of that genre or collection. And there can be multiple different quantitative approaches depending on the kind of collection that you're having or the kind of questions that can be asked towards this kind of collection. And from method to tool, that I think this is also where digital humanists are useful for. So we don't want to compute one thing that is for one person's question. So we want to make this a tool so that different scholars can come in, they can come to LoGaRT, and they can throw in different kinds of questions. And this tool then serve them all. So it is not to facilitate one specific research project, but to sophisticate a group of scholars. And what we were able to do is that we basically are collecting evidences directly from primary sources. And we argue that you need to have a comprehensive collection of the primary sources. And then we allow our users to observe the overall patterns generated by computer-assisted quantitative analysis. But the interpretation is still relying on the historian or the user, because this person, in order to correctly interpret what the data is telling, he or she needs to understand the nature and also the limits of that collection in order to not juxtapose a very wrong and very off interpretation. Yeah. So with that, I look forward to your questions and feedback. And I also want to give a strong acknowledgement to my colleague who has been working with me in the past 7 or 8 years, Calvin Ye. So he is the one, so I think I'm the one who has the idea, but the tool and all the experiment cannot exist without him. So he's the developer behind LoGaRT and also behind all the computational experiment we have been doing. Thank you.